Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are talking national political news of the day, and we're going to start with Super Tuesday, which comes up in 6 days. This is usually the biggest day of the presidential primary, but since the races are pretty much a foregone conclusion, for the presidency, we can talk a little bit about it, but Nikki Haley is still in the race technically. Joe Biden doesn't really have any challenges. We just had the Michigan race happen, and Joe Biden had, I guess you can call it, a little bit of a challenge from not committed, which is kind of Michigan's version of none of the above. A lot of votes from Muslim candidates and other people protesting him not standing up to Netanyahu with regard to the what's going on in with Gaza. Trump defeated Haley pretty handily, but 27% of the voters at the last count I looked, I don't know if that's changed today, about that, voted not for Trump. And a little bit of a concern for Trump because I think it's something like 40% of Nikki Haley's voters nationwide have said they won't vote for Trump in November. So that has to be a concern for if that is true to Michigan in a battleground state, which is always close between these two candidates. It is sort of a light blue state, kind of, at this point in time. But that's really the news. I don't think that there are any states that Nikki Haley is expected to win. I don't know. I don't expect any big changes in the Democratic race. Anything you want to say about the presidential race, and if you expect any surprises on Tuesday?
Well, I just want to give a little feedback about Michigan because everybody did have the opportunity to see kind of like you said, a battleground state. I think there's only 7 real, significant battleground states that have been identified as. That means that they were within 3 points last time around, and the expectation is that as those states go, that will be determine who becomes the next president. So Michigan's actually pretty important. Like I said, as just a proxy. Now, what I think is most interesting, you mentioned that Nikki Haley got a quarter of the votes there. So there's some percentage of the Republican Party, with Donald Trump getting 68%. So some percentage of the Republican Party, at the very least, wants a protest vote or an alternative. The other piece of this is the uncommitted votes, like you said. Again, that's a protest vote again of the Democrats against Joe Biden. There's a population of college students or university-related, population, not just students, maybe professors and people who choose to live, more left-leaning folks who choose to live in a college town in Ann Arbor. So that's over 100,000 people in a state where 700 and almost 800,000 voters participated in the Democratic side. So beyond like what the actual numbers were, the fact that we're looking at some degree of protest votes about certain policies of the president's or certain characteristics, age, temperament, potentially supporting an insurrection. There are a few things that people can be sort of bent about or hold a grudge about. But what I was going to say is what I think is most interesting about Michigan is that we're hearing from all different commentators on different sides about what to actually take away from it. So some folks are saying that the extraordinarily higher turnout from Republicans might be a little bit of a proxy for the enthusiasm, whereas you've got a lot of folks that are discouraged in the Democratic Party right now because of the negativity. I think that people are thinking, feeling, reading, hearing, contemplating. There's that Nikki Haley negativity on the other side, but 40% more of Republicans turned out in a state with 8 million voters, so registered voters. So the question is, what's the takeaway? And I think that, basically the spin machines are in full effect, saying what we can expect this to mean on Super Tuesday and beyond. But the reality is that there's not necessarily a correlation between primary enthusiasm and general election enthusiasm. So there's no rule, there's no steadfast rule here. I think it's going to be more of the same each election cycle as its own beast, so to speak. And I think that your question was what might we see in the presidential race looking forward. I think we're going to see a lot more of the same, where it's a near certainty that both Joe Biden and Donald Trump become the nominees, barring Deus ex machina, which is God out of the sky, something unforetold comes down from above. But beyond that, I think we're going to see a pivot to the general election as these people lock it up. So Trump is expected to possibly lock up the enough delegates within just a couple of weeks from Super Tuesday, by
Right.
middle of March, and Biden in effect has already locked it up. So I think that's the big takeaway, is that change is the only constant in the universe, but we are going to have a repeat of the last presidential election.
Okay. The other news is Marianne Williamson, who wasn't even running, is back in the race because she came out ahead of Dean Phillips, I think like 2% to 1% or something like that. She's decided to run again, for whatever that means. But just saying there, I don't expect that that's going to be of big import in
I'll
the
just
race.
mention I'll just mention with 99% in, it's like 3% to 2.7%. She
Okay.
got almost 23,000 votes. He got about 21,000. So they are marginal in any respects. And I think I'll just say one last thing about that. There's always uncommitted voters. There are always
Yes.
dissenting votes in every cycle. And so the question is, are enthusiasm and versus discouragement. And
Right.
people were saying Michigan might be a signal that there is a core portion of Republicans that are discouraged to the point where they would stay home. I mean, proofs in the pudding, we'll see. But to spite the country in the name of a principle, I don't think that too many people do that.
Yeah, in 2012, there were over 20,000 uncommitted voters because Obama didn't have an opponent. It's usually biggest when there's not an opponent. And anyway, I want to talk about some other races because there are like I think about about 12 states that are having there. That's why they call it Super Tuesday, because it tends to be the biggest one. Originally, it was a block of southern states because they wanted to increase their southern clout in the primaries, but other states started to chime in on Super Tuesday, and some of the southern states decided to leave it because they didn't want their particular impact diluted. So I want to talk about the U.S. Senate. There are a couple of real key primaries. Of course, we've discussed our very crowded primary here in California, which appears to be coalescing into a two-person race, Adam Schiff and Garvey, although the Katie Porter is on Garvey's heels. Will the Dobbs effect help Katie Porter? I doubt it. He's about 5% behind in the latest poll. But the Dobbs effect benefiting Democrats, even if it's there, would tend to be spread out over all the Democrats. It wouldn't necessarily benefit one candidate, and I don't think it would make that kind of difference. However, polls are also tricky when you got to have a whole bunch of candidates. They don't tend to be as accurate. So if there is enthusiasm behind Katie Porter, but as you and I know from the convention, even though it's a smaller group, there's also enthusiasm behind Barbara Lee, just not enough people. Unless a lot of Barbara Lee voters start looking at the polls and deciding to rally around Katie Porter, I don't think that's going to change. I'll ask you to comment on that, but I want to talk about the Texas primary. And it's very interesting because we've got so it's really coming down to Representative Colin Allred. He's in the state, or he's in Congress, and State Senator Roland Gutierrez, who is probably considered to be to the left of Allred, but Allred is kind of an old-fashioned politician who tries to be the Gephardt, or the people who compromise to get things done. He actually signed off on the bipartisan the border bill. And even though he is not necessarily enthusiastic about some of the language about calling it the open border policies and the rest, his feeling is if you can get some stuff in there, if it's going to pass anyway, by the Republicans, even if it's going to be blocked by the Senate, if you get some stuff in there, including some stuff that maybe actually helps the immigrants, some funding and asylum applicants, this is old-fashioned get things done politics. Nothing's perfect. You've got a bunch of different constituencies that maybe this is the kind of thing that would be good, and especially if you can get into the Senate. You take this into account that there's been at least one poll that has both of those candidates within striking distance of Ted Cruz, who is not very popular lately, and Texas has had some really bad press over the abortion and a couple of other things, including the governor's policies at the border, which are maybe seen as a little bit extreme. Even among conservatives. There may be an opportunity here. We won't know for a while until more polling starts to happen, but this could be a very significant race, primary race. And Allred does seem to be ahead of Gutierrez. There's a couple of other Democratic candidates, but they don't seem to be gelling. I generally tend to support candidates more like Gutierrez, but it may be that Allred, who also is maybe more in tune with Texas around gun control, as you've talked about, Beto O'Rourke made a huge mistake around that. Allred is more moderate. He may be the candidate to do it. I am predicting that Allred wins this and hands Ted Cruz the biggest existential challenge that he's faced so far.
That would be truly historic. I think, certainly for our time period, like you said, that there are polling results out there showing that it's running even. I think he clearly wins his primary on Super Tuesday, because if you add up all the support, Gutierrez is more progressive. If you add up all the support for all, I think 9 candidates or so, or 8 other candidates, it doesn't even equal Allred. So there's an opportunity here. Like you said, Cruz is a particularly unlikable personality. Not to judge him, but I think that's the conventional wisdom.
That trip to Mexico when everybody else was freezing didn't help him.
Right. And so he, just his style, he's a effective lawyer and litigator, but it's also, that's kind of punching down when you're talking to regular people. So yeah, I think it's interesting that you said that Allred has a shot at this, and we'll see. There's a lot of time left between now and November, so I think that's going to be a really interesting one to follow.
And he might have the formula for a Democrat to win in Texas, which is becoming bluer as things move on. On the other hand, I believe Gutierrez is from El Paso. There's a lot of politics around that, but we'll have to see how it goes. But Allred has been ahead of El Paso in there. A lot more to discuss. There are 115 House races going on. That's about a quarter of them that are having primaries here. Alabama, as we have discussed on this show, was the Supreme Court ruled that they had to make another at least competitive race Very interesting one, and then the Alabama came up with another joke of a map, but they were forced to revise that, and so there is a second Democratic heavy district. It's a very poor district, and it may actually be the poorest district in the country, and what the type of politics that it may introduce is it's not only racially very black, but it introduces rural poverty of the type that we've talked about, that involves a lot of white poverty, that really doesn't get a lot of discussion. White rural poverty that doesn't get a lot of discussion in American politics for a long time. It's the type of poverty that Michael Harrington, who used to be the standard bearer for democratic socialism in this country, wrote about in The Other America, which was actually after JFK was killed. A copy of it was discovered on his desk and may have been the inspiration for what became the War on Poverty and Johnson's policies. And it's something that's recognized, when as something that really hasn't been addressed in a comprehensive way. And so if you have a spokesperson for that who takes on racial justice issues in conjunction with rural white poverty, it could be somebody who represents a kind of a unification of class politics.
Well, let me give you my view of what happened January the 6th. It was a violent insurrection for the purpose of trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power after a legitimately certified election from one administration to the next. That's what it was. With regard to the suggestion that the RNC should be in the business of picking and choosing Republicans who ought to be supported, traditionally the view of the national party committees is that we support all members of our party, regardless of their positions on some issues. The issue is whether or not the RNC should be sort of singling out members of our party who may have different views from the majority. That's not the job of the RNC.
All right, big topic. Mitch McConnell is stepping down as the Senate Majority Leader. He will be stepping down in November. He will not be leaving his Senate position. He will serve out his term if he lives that long, quite frankly. And his term ends officially in 2027 in January. And so some people will be running for his position in 2026. He has had some very distressing moments, including one in which he basically froze up at a press conference. His leadership has been questioned. His politics are considered out of touch with, he's not liked by what is referred to as the Make America Great side of politics. He's seen as part of the old guard. I question that, however, because I actually see his politics that he introduced in and around 2010 as having generated the MAGA era of politics, when he basically decided that Obama was going to be a one-term president. At least he tried to make him that, and refused to cooperate with Obama and the Democrats in anything. I mean, basically tried to sabotage the economy by coming up with a rule that you could not introduce any new spending programs without cutting some program equally somewhere else, which basically denied Obama, for the first time since the Depression, Keynesian stimulus policy. The idea is that you spend a bit more so that you stimulate the economy, create multipliers, and the rest. Every president had that tool, including Reagan, who basically spent us out of the recession, first the recession that Carter had, and then the second recession that he created with his supply side economics. and then with military Keynesianism, spent it and created the biggest deficit in history. And then Bush, each Bush had that tool. Every president had that tool. He denied that to Obama, and so we had a very slow recovery because Obama had to resort to monetarist policies. He tried to shut the economy down. Unfortunately for him, Obama had a very brilliant economic team, and he tried to shut down Obamacare from passing, even though this was basically a conservative alternative to social medicine that had been created by the Heritage Foundation initially, because it was Obama. Obama had presented it. He basically shut down bipartisanship. The Tea Parties that basically showed up at Democratic Party town halls and sometimes got borderline violent, which is basically similar to what has happened at school board meetings more recently over what they call critical race theory, which is basically any Black history that involves anything other than I have a dream and Jackie Robinson. It's just he set the legacy of this. So he basically suffered from what he created. It's the genie come out of the bottle that he created. So I don't feel sorry for him on this. He is responsible for this brand of politics. He also, when a vacancy came up after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, kept a vacancy on the Supreme Court for over a year so that he could replace him when Trump came in. Just draconian, cynical power politics. In a way, he's worse than Trump. Was worse than Trump. And I'm sorry, I don't have a whole lot of good to say about him on this. I mean, he's not dead, so I don't feel like I have to honor him in any way. But he's retiring because he's older, and granted, he's part of the kind of globalist faction, so he tried to be responsible in a way because he's kind of a statesman in a way that Trump isn't. And so give him a little bit of credit for that. He doesn't want to shut the country down or allow Ukraine to fall or anything like that. But so he's not a total nihilist the way they are. But this is his legacy, and I think he's giving up the fight, and we'll see who replaces him. Maybe we can talk a little bit about those candidates.
Yeah, so you walked back a little bit. I've got nothing good to say by, in effect, saying that he was effective and that he had at least one eye on the international order and context and history. So he was a little more aware than the current crop of Freedom Caucus folks that are rising to prominence more in the House, but also there is a presence of that strain of republicanism we're calling it Trumpism or MAGA or what you said, Tea Party, but yeah, this sort of more radicalized, committed, right wing element within the legislature. So I'll say a couple things about him to kind of for context. He will now, when he retires, when he leaves the minority, when he leaves the minority leadership position, there you go. He will have been the longest serving Senate leader because he was the leader of the GOP since 2007. So that's that's 17 years. That's more than even the longest serving Democratic Party caucus leader. So he's got a duration anyway. I think his highlights are, from the perspective of Democrats and left-leaning folks, his highlights are actually lowlights, more in line with what you said. So, for example, blocking Merrick Garland for like a year or so, like you said, in Obama's last year from the Supreme Court. I think that's going to after Justice Scalia died. I think that will be historically considered, an awful accomplishment to just block nominees like that. He did eliminate the judicial filibuster because he turned back around, and that was called the nuclear option when he did it. He cleared the way for Neil Gorsuch to get passed instead of the sort of comity and some degree of bipartisanship that has in the past been surrounding judges getting nominated. People would typically want the highest caliber of folks that serve the broader country's best interests in mind. But Neil Gorsuch, we don't have to say anything bad about him, but he may be a pivotal figure in undermining the system of regulations that we have, that we rely on for so much of what we consider the federal government. Neil Gorsuch has had a vendetta against that. It's been published. So McConnell made that possible. He also quickly pushed through Amy Coney Barrett, kind of reversing a display of hypocrisy. Yep. So again, some people call these lowlights, but I think these are big accomplishments, because what you then say is he locked in with Kavanaugh at that point, by approving Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. That's the GOP Supreme Court. That's the 6-3 Republican majority that will change the legal system, interpretation of the Constitution in our country for a generation. And he sort of single-handedly managed the Senate to make that maneuver. One last thing I'll say, I know we're getting a little long in the tooth here on his highlights. The Trump impeachment. He prevented Trump from being accountable twice. He made sure, he came up with the tactical or, the strategic position that the appropriate place for Trump to face justice is in the courts rather than actual impeachment. And once Trump was not impeached, not once, but twice, particularly the second time, though, from then on in, people thought, in hindsight, well, why didn't they do that? If leaders in the House and leaders in the Senate are going to blame President Trump for his actions on that day and the sort of network of actions surrounding President Trump in trying to deny the peaceful transfer of power, I would say single-handedly, he was responsible for making that happen in the Senate.
And he says, oh, yeah, no, this belongs in court. And then when it's filed in court, he goes right along with saying, oh, this is a political prosecution. I mean, I'm sorry. It's just absolutely disgusting. And here, the impeachment actually got 7 Republicans, the most bipartisan impeachment of a president ever, of the few there have been.
So I'll hand it back to you in a second, but basically you had mentioned, well, what's next? Who might replace him? And he was already challenged for the leadership more recently, I think, very recently, the last time around, but he survived. And I think just a few weeks ago, one of our last shows, I mentioned that I thought he's done because there was just besides his health issues. I think you said he froze once, but I think we saw him freeze twice. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of concern about his, his health overall. But just more importantly, the media circus that surrounds Trump and what's next for the Republicans, where they're calling them the 3 Johns. So Senator Thune from South Dakota, Senator Cornyn from Texas, and Senator Barrasso from Wyoming. Each one of them in turn over the last few weeks have endorsed Donald Trump for president. And I think, the last one was just a handful of days ago. So once all the potential leaders came out and endorsed Trump, and the writing was on the wall, it didn't take very long for McConnell to realize that it's time, I think. And that's why just a handful of days later after all that, he's made this announcement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know who's going to run for it, his position, Hawley, but he's not going to do it. I think the Republicans are smart enough not to vote him in. Maybe he'll get 2 or 3 votes. That's about it. Lindsey Graham, I don't think so either. First of all, he's he's embarrassing on about a dozen different levels. I'm thinking Thune is a possibility. That's a possibility. Maybe a woman. I'm trying to think of who might be the best possibility that if they want to go that route. But I don't know who's got a lot of seniority in there. It's they really like their seniority. I don't know that they want to have anybody in there who's under 80 or whatever. I mean, it's hard to know. You'll probably see a lot of people posturing, but everybody voting for Trump. Is Trump going to have his hand in there? I mean, he owns the party. Does he own the party in the Senate? He hasn't had a lot of direct hand in the Senate. The Senate has been the least owned of the part of the Republican Party. He clearly owns the RNC now, right? She's resigning, so he's going to tear right into that fund to pay off some legal stuff. He owns the House. We know that. We'll discuss a little bit about that in the next segment. But the Senate has been where he doesn't really quite have the same level of stranglehold. We'll learn if he gains that in this. But, it's just McConnell, we know he detests Trump. He can't say that, but we know it. I mean, Trump has cost him the majority in 3 straight elections. I mean, the Republicans should have won the majority in 2018, in 2020, and 2022. And it's not likely, but possible they'll lose it again this November. And if they do, it's Trump's fault again, 4 times in a row. So it's he's got to resent Trump for that.
The reason that I nodded when you said Senator John Thune is, granted, all 3 of these guys that I mentioned have had leadership positions, but John Thune is the whip. And so the whip is the guy, his office, his staff, they go from door to door and they ask people how they're going to vote on things. And they're really good at taking the pulse of what people want and what people need. And that's a good set of skills and a good set of connections to have in your Rolodex that you've been able to not just accurately assess how voting's going to turn out, but that you've sort of earned. People are willing to talk to you. People are willing to tell you their innermost thoughts. And that bill that made it through the Senate, granted, McConnell is going to get credit for it as the leader, but as the whip, I can't overstate that how difficult it must have been to cobble together a border bill that got out of the Senate because Trump's pressure was strong to block that border bill. Coming to terms of saying these are the conditions, these are our essential elements of what we need to see happen on the border for us to release, whatever it is, like $90 billion for Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan, but also that border bill. And there is talk that there's, maybe we'll talk about it in the next segment, but there is talk that bill still might get some traction in the House through a discharge petition. So we'll see.
We went through a lot to get here, but we are ready to govern, and that will begin right away. You've all heard me talk a lot today, and I'm not going to belabor the point because the sun is bright and it's too warm for the fall. But I'll say this. We're going to dispense with all the usual ceremonies and celebrations that traditionally follow a new speakership because we have no time for either one. The American people's business is too urgent in this moment. The hour is late, the crisis is great. In America, we hear you. And we are reporting again, as I said in there, to our duty stations. That will begin in just a few moments. This entire group is going to go back to the House floor, and we are going to pass our resolution in support of the nation of Israel, our closest ally in the Middle East. You're going to see an aggressive schedule in the days and weeks ahead. You're going to see Congress working as hard as it's ever worked, and we are going to deliver for the American people. I'm grateful for this opportunity. I want to thank you for being patient with us, and I promise you it'll be worth it.
Well, this brings us to the Speaker of the House, Johnson. He was in what's been described as a very contentious meeting of all the leaders and President Biden, and all the pressure was put on Johnson because the border bill could make it through the Senate. As you mentioned in the last segment, it got stopped in the Senate so that it wouldn't be embarrassed, because Johnson, in his position, consistent with his ideology, of course, but also with the pressure on him, because he could be removed at any time, as we know, for the reasons we've discussed. Can't let it go to the floor, because if it goes to the floor, a coalition of Democrats and the sane wing of the Republicans will pass it. And this is a border bill that is mostly what the Republicans want. And people like, like we discussed, of a certain candidate in Texas who will possibly be a senator, a few things thrown to the Democrats in it, in old-fashioned politics. It's not a bill I want. It's just, but it's just something, but it's something that may have some sort of effect and may actually mitigate the issues at the border. May not, but it may. But Trump doesn't want anything mitigated before the election, and so he wants the bill dead, or he doesn't want the perception of anything mitigated before the election, or the perception that anything's being done, because he wants that as a wedge issue. So he killed it. And with the influence he had in the Senate, not just his influence, but also the fact that they don't want the Republicans embarrassed in the House, because they've got 30 to 40 members in close races who don't want to be put on the spot, because they don't want to lose their reelection, because the Democrats the Republicans are in grave danger of losing the House. In fact, it's more likely that they will lose the House than not. So, even if they have a real good chance of winning the Senate. So, so what did Speaker Johnson do? Well, there is talk over the past couple of days of reviving that deal. But are the Democrats going to want to give up even more? They gave up everything. So what is in this new deal? What is Johnson going to do? Can he put something together that will make the Democrats willing to do it, and make the people in the Freedom Caucus happy enough, or at least content enough, to go along with it?
So interestingly, I think we buried the lead a little bit here in this segment today, because of the looming government shutdown. So if you ask Speaker Johnson's office, they were asking him this same question, and I'll address that more directly momentarily. But his office said the biggest obstacle now is the biggest priority rather is that they not shut down the government.
Shut down the government.
Yeah,
right.
And that's despite the I don't know if desire is the right word, but certainly there are the Freedom Caucus element of the House right now does have a set of poison pills that they would like to see. They want something. They're saying, hey, how are you going to negotiate not shutting down the government without getting some of these things that we really want and really need? And
right, and we should mention that the polling data suggests that the Republicans will take the brunt from the voters if the government is shut down.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess there was a meeting as recently as last night or the night before. I think it was last night, where we had the leaders. President Biden, Vice President Harris, but also Senate Majority Leader Schumer and Minority Leader McConnell. House Minority Leader Jeffries, and they all basically cornered Johnson and said, you do understand that we can't do this. Like we have to keep the government open. And, that's always been an option in the recent past, and there have been shutdowns before. But right now in this election year, Super Tuesday right around the corner, State of the Union is 2 days after, is scheduled to be 2 days after the Super Tuesday next week. It's just a really bad time for everyone involved. And so if, for folks who don't know, Friday, March 1st, if there's not a continuation of the budget or a passage of the budget, which can't actually happen because all the bills are separate and they're still negotiating element by element, multiple bills. But so it would be the starting on Saturday, the Veterans Affairs Department's Veterans Affairs, Agriculture, Energy, Transportation, and Housing and Urban Development would all be shut down. And if they don't figure something out by next Friday, a stopgap spending measure to give them some more time to negotiate, then the Department of Defense would lose its funding, Homeland Security, their capacity to spend money. They all have contingency plans, and the Treasury Department does give money out to let people, continue some operations that are essential, but that includes health and human services. So it'd be massively disruptive if they couldn't come up with a plan. They did announce that they have a plan. Typically, that means, like I said, a deal to put a stopgap measure in place. But what they've committed to is after this, I believe, after this stopgap measure is that they're not going to do this. They're going to, the funding has already been approved. The spending, rather, has already been approved through the end of the fiscal year, which is like September, the end of September. They just need to release the money to go along with the spending commitments that they've already agreed to. So there's a lot of theater involved. Again, it's to put some poison pills in there that are on the conservative Republican wish list. And I think that that Johnson, he's been called a pendulum. They've been saying he's been going back and forth between saying, "Oh, I got this, I'm reasonable," but then going back to his core. And he's got to face the reality that that motion to vacate the chair just takes one person. And the Freedom Caucus, I think one of the derogatory terms is the Matt Gaetz 8, the crazy 8. I think that's a little funny, but it's to the point is that those people have expressed a willingness to unseat him. So his seat is actually at risk if he doesn't sort this out.
Right. I mean, I'll bounce back just a minute to the border bill because there is a threat of a filibuster, and it's a question as to whether or not in the Senate they can get 60 Republicans. There's 60 votes totally. I forgot to mention that Biden is going to the border tomorrow, and the Republicans are pissed off about that. He's going to a border town. Republicans are saying that's political. Well, duh, it's political. That's it's so. But yes, with the budget, they definitely do not want to shut this thing down. This is another case where the Freedom Caucus just thinks that they've got the leverage, but if they lose to the House, lose to the Democrats, they've got nothing. They can go outside and hold their press conferences and maybe some people will pay attention in the right wing media, and they can fundraise and they can maybe write books and do something later, but they don't seem to have a grasp that a majority in the House is the only way they have any kind of influence. Because they'll easily get reelected in their crazy gerrymandered districts, and this is the politics of it. But there are Republicans that just got in by their teeth. McCarthy's district is a possible loss. It's not likely, but it's possible. So we got Trump is also going to the border, by the way. It's just it's going to be in this anyway. We'll see how this deal with shutting the government down goes. But there are Republicans who think it's good for them to shut the government down because there are people out there who thinks that government is bad and you want to shut it down every chance you get. This is the politics we're at, where they don't understand how it can affect everything. And yeah, shutting down the military it's not going to shut down the military, but it will affect veterans getting their checks. Anyway, I'm real curious as to how it will play out in it. But this is where the Senate is supposed to be the voice of reason. The Senate is supposed to be like the upper house of not the House of Commons, but the House of Lords, right? They're supposed to be the one with the wisdom, and it's not playing out. But what do we know about the deal, about the potential deal? Do we have any details on it?
Well, two things I would say about this. You and I did cover the elements of the border, what was at stake, what the Democrats have agreed to in the
No,
bill.
I mean about the shutdown. I thought there was
Oh,
something being proposed.
yeah, absolutely, 100%. Before we came before we connected today, it was already leaked out that the deal's in place for them to put that continuing resolution in place. Whatever I called it. I'm sorry. It's the stopgap spending measure is what they call it. So it's an extension for them to further negotiate to get to dial in the language. But what these poison pills are not are minimal. So it's not basically Johnson is expected to give in on the spending, but in return he's going to hold the line on the Ukraine funding and the foreign policy and the border bill. So he's basically signaling, I'm doing this one thing because we have to. We just have a few days. But then knowing that he's going to be able to stall on the Ukraine funding. But with that piece of it,
Yeah, but is there anything about the domestic funding? Because I was looking for that and I didn't find anything before the show.
Are we talking? So what I was talking about is
I'm talking about the government shutdown bill. There's certain things that the Freedom Caucus wanted to fund. I just wondered if you'd seen anything specific, because there were a bunch of things.
Yeah, they're really small things. I mean, not to say that they're not important for folks, but like, for example, the ability to ship birth control pills that the FDA said that they want to, Comstock is going to be superseded by a policy that it's okay to, I think it's mifepristone it's called, that would be legal to send according to the FDA. Republicans are saying, let's draw the line there. We don't want to approve that. And then there's another one that, like, for example, that the Defense Department would facilitate, the fund people going across lines, I think, for abortion. It's like a wish list that they've carried throughout the budget debate process going back to like December. It's things on that list.
Because remember, one guy was holding up appointments over reimbursement for travel costs for
women. Tuberville from Alabama.
Right. So it's just this is the politics we're at with the Alabama decision. Did Tuberville really want to be the focal point of that? Is a big mistake. This is why I think that the Republicans are going to have a real hard time on this. The Democrats really need to make the social issues the point in these things, that to bring these things out, these social points out in the spending issues, even though they're small points in the grand point. But they also don't want the government to shut down for practical reasons, even if they'll politically benefit. This is the point, is that the Democrats are always the one who don't want to split the baby. They could gain politically.
One of the other ones I just remembered was Mayorkas. So one of the things that they're saying that Republicans are trying to block is they want to zero out the line item funding for Secretary Mayorkas's position. So if the Senate is not going to pick up the impeachment, or certainly, Senator Schumer said Senator Schumer will likely, or 100% likely, be able to shut it down to a certain extent. So they're saying, well, if we can't impeach him, we just want to zero out his funding, or else we're not going to play nice on the budget. So it's targeted poison pills of that nature that are, like I said, they're small, but they're part of the team building exercise.
So they want to basically not fund the Department of the Interior? I mean,
just that one position.
I see.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's things like that. I saw a list of like 5 things, and I think that they have a long list of things like that across each of the funding bills.
Is there any precedent for that? Do you know?
I mean, who knows in how they do the log rolling and how the sausage gets made? They throw in so many things in so many bills that we never even hear about. I just think it's, if you take someone like Matt Gaetz on face value, what he's saying is, look, we're going to give a lot. The deficit is 1.6 trillion this year. It's going to be 1.8 trillion next year, and there's no cutting in sight. There's no plan to cut in sight. Let's at least get some of these small things. So if you're a Republican, if you're a conservative, you would think to yourself, we should get some of the small things that we want. If our speaker's got our back, then he's going to do that. But what's happening here is the Senate bill is passed as is, basically, for the budgets, and there's minimal room for tinkering to get these things done. But with that continuing, with that extension, then they're able to buy some time to that stopgap spending measure. They're able to try to get these things in there. They're certainly not going to get the Secretary of Homeland Security zeroed out.
Yeah, I mean, again, we've talked about how if you want to get the deficit in control, you got to revisit the tax cuts of 2017. I mean, that's a big one. You got to be able to look at the military budget and the production of military equipment that the military doesn't even want, and a bunch of other things. But we're never going to look at that. So that is what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. You're not going to deal with it by cutting out little payments here and there.
Eeny, meeny, chili, beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
Okay, that brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
This is about the funding, that foreign policy funding, foreign aid funding bill that came out of the Senate, but that the House is kind of refusing to take up. Folks, there's energy around the concept of a discharge petition. There's only been 3 in history that have actually made it out. But what needs to happen is they take an existing bill that's been sitting for 30 days or more, and they use that as a shell to put in the language that they want. They move that out of committee without it being approved by the majority leader in the House, and then it gets 218 votes on the floor, and then 30 days later it becomes law, basically, that kind of thing. So, after 20 minutes of debate. After 20 minutes of debate, the full House takes it up, and then that's officially out of committee. So I predict that we will see the 4th time this happens in our nation's history. This discharge position for foreign aid and Homeland Security and border security bill will make it out of the House, and I think that's going to happen relatively quickly.
All right. The Supreme Court has agreed to take up the immunity issue, and they'll be hearing arguments for it in April. My prediction is that it's ridiculous, that the Supreme Court is not going to agree that the president has absolute immunity from criminal liability while the person is president. There are at least 2 of the conservative majority who understand that check, lack of a check on power, would be disastrous. That the impeachment absolutely is not a deterrence at all. It's a political process. No president is ever going to be removed from office by impeachment. We've learned that it's a complete joke. And so those 2, Roberts and Kavanaugh, will vote against it. However, those 2 are just corrupt enough to help Trump out by delaying the trial further, and that's the sole purpose of this. So they will vote against it, but they have given Trump what he really wanted in this thing, which was to delay the trial. With that, until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.